are in the series, The Gospel According to Moses in the book of Exodus, and this is Reverend John Ferret. We're on Exodus episode 16 because we're in Exodus chapter 20, verse 16. Now, this is lesson 47, and we have multiple episodes because we're going through the book of Exodus. We got to Exodus chapter 20, and all of a sudden we came to the covenant of Adonai, verses 1 through 17 here in chapter 20. And so we got to lesson 47, and I decided to break it up into multiple episodes as we're going to study the Ten Commandments in depth. We're on the ninth commandment. Now, it says in Hebrew, Lo ta'ana bereaka ed shakir. No answer your neighbor, witness false. Now that's kind of what it exactly says in Hebrew, and I'm going to read it here in the New American Standard, verse 16. It says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And like I said, the Hebrew is no answer your neighbor, witness false. And again, I always thank Dennis Prager, whose really Torah lessons for 25 years are really the foundation of me teaching these lessons on Torah for Christians. I've learned so much from Dennis, especially with the fact that he speaks fluent Hebrew, knows the biblical Hebrew very well. And again, I'm using not only his 25 years of audio sessions, but also his book that is called The Rational Bible on the Book of Exodus. And Dennis Prager has shown that the Hebrew here is very difficult. And he believes that the best way of looking at this is not what I just read in Exodus 20, verse 16, nor the Hebrew. The best way of looking at this is to say, don't answer your neighbor with false testimony. Now, the word false comes from the Hebrew word sheker. Its Strong's number is H2879, and it basically means a lie, false words, untruths. And then the Hebrew word that we read as witness, and it's a noun. In Hebrew, it's a noun, and it sounds like a witness in court, somebody that's actually being a witness in some sort of a trial. The Hebrew word is ed, and the Strong's number is H5707, and that can be a witness. Again, this is a noun, or a testimony, or a statement, or an answer. Now, Nahum Sarna, the Hebrew Bible scholar who wrote the JPS Torah commentary for the book of Exodus, he has another, obviously some very interesting comments specifically on this commandment. And his view is it's giving evidence in court. I'm assuming that this is probably because of the translation of the Hebrew word ed into English as witness. And like I said, it could be testimony, or perhaps a statement or an answer. All nouns that's what a witness is. So again, with regards to Dennis Prager's views, and he looks upon this and he says, Sarna's got a point. Because if we take a look at the commandments, starting with the 6th commandment to the 10th commandment, God's Torah, his instruction, not law, his teaching, these commandments, number 6 through 10, which begins with do not murder, and it ends with do not covet, these commandments are like instruction by God, helping us understand what's required for a good society. So we take a look at it. Commandments number 6 through 10, protect life, don't murder. Protect family, do not commit adultery. Protect property, do not steal. Protect justice. In other words, don't be a witness in court that lies. and protect against evil actions that comes from an overwhelming desire to have something that somebody has. We'll get that into in the 10th commandment in the next lesson. Now, again, Nahum Sarna's view from the excellent JPS Torah commentary seems to imply that it's only for court procedures only. In other words, giving false evidence or allowing false evidence. And this really, from Nahum Sarna's point of view and Dennis Prager's point of view, so these two Jewish scholars agree that this really jeopardizes the very fabric of society. And I agree. People will lose faith in the justice system, lose faith in the courts, lose faith in the fact that our government provides a means where we can attain justice. And consider what's going on in our own country today. The loss of trust that we have in our leaders, the loss of trust that we have in our courts, in the FBI, and even our doctors, and the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and even the American Medical Association, the MAA, as we have come out of this pandemic of the China virus. So we can say that indeed in our society in the United States, things have really gone wrong. The United States has completely turned from Commandment 9, and we can see the truth of God's statement here, these commandments 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And we're taking a look at 9 right now. Don't lie in court. Don't be a lying witness. Don't completely destroy the fabric of our society, which is based upon justice and truth. And we can see, indeed, God seems to be teaching what is the essence of a good society. And as we go through the Torah, one thing that we're going to see over and over and over again is the Lord, God himself. His name is Yahweh. That the preservation of justice is a major focus of his. We must have true witnesses. So when we go into the JPS Torah commentary and we take a look at what Sarna says, in part of his commentary, he said it's so important that 2 witnesses were necessary. God demanded 2 witnesses. These are necessary in order for the evidence to be valid. As false witnesses were punished according to the principle of talion. That is, for their mendacious, damaging testimony, if they lie, they would receive the same punishment that would have been meted out to the accused. This is unbelievable. This is what God is saying. He's saying that justice is so critical. What a picture. What a practice. Imagine if we had the same penalty in the United States today. That if a witness is proven false, they must face the same penalty that the accused would have to suffer. That's amazing. But there is a debate and solid, good discussion that the 9th commandment is not only about the court. Now, I held up to this for a long time when I took a look at the Hebrew, but I've learned something. Well, let's go into this and I'll show you how I changed my mind. Back in the late 11th century and early 12th century, there was a great Torah scholar and his name was Ibn Ezra, and he was very troubled about the Hebrew here in the 9th commandment. Does it mean a witness as in a court? But ed, and again Hebrew is conceptual in meaning, and so with regards to the picture ed, it can also mean a testimony, a statement, or even an answer. The Hebrew doesn't necessarily just mean a witness in a court. it seems it could be anyone giving a false answer to one's neighbor. In other words, Ibn Ezra is saying it seems as if the Ninth Commandment is about any false statement to anyone. In other words, do not lie. Brevard Childs is an Old Testament scholar at Yale University, and Dennis Prager references him, and I looked him up. And Brevard Childs, one of the most influential and credible Christian Old Testament scholars, he too thought that the Ninth Commandment was for any and all lies. So, is it only regarding a court session? Or is it more? And like I said, thanking Dennis Prager, he talked about the fact that Hebrew is very unclear. And so we can see why good scholars can disagree because of the Hebrew. So we ask, did God inspire Moses to use the Hebrew word ed as witness? Or did God really inspire Moses to use the word ed to mean any testimony, any evidence, any statement, any answer? I like this example. You think about a child, he takes money from his mom's purse. Let's say it's $1. Not much, but the child is caught and he lies. He gives a false answer to his mother. And I would have to say his mother is definitely his neighbor. He gives Ed Shakir, an untrue statement. Now, this situation where a child steals $1 from his mother's purse and is caught, this is not like lying in court, which can have serious consequences. So much so that what if the accused is really innocent? And the witness in the situation lies. And as a result, the accused is executed. Definitely, these are not the same. But in the case of the child, when I look at this, stop the lying in its tracks. In other words, like nip it in the bud. Punish it. Stop it. Teach that child that indeed lying is a serious matter. Protect the child from growing up as a liar. In other words, we come to God who says these commandments, number 6 through 10, are so necessary for having a good society. And so we as parents, to say we'll work with God to preserve a good, moral, and just society at the source. It begins in our own families with our own kids. So for me, I can see both when I take a look at the situation of a child who steals $1, and is caught and so on, that indeed we are trying to train up a child in the way that he should go. And if families all across the world were able to do this with their children, we would have a just and good society. So the Hebrew convinced me. Like I said, I used to be of the mindset that this 9th commandment had only something to do with the court. The reason being is, you'll take a look at Leviticus 19 verse 11. I won't read it. You can look it up for yourself. But Leviticus 19:11 has the phrase, do not lie. So it's like already taken care of. This could be just meaning lying in court, and then the Lord in Leviticus 19:11 takes care of all lies. But now, understanding Hebrew and understanding the conceptual idea of the Hebrew, indeed, I've changed my view. I think it means definitely don't lie in court. But I think it definitely means don't be that child who steals $1 from his mother's purse and is caught and then lies to his mother. I believe right now, from my point of view, that this indeed covers all lies. And I think Dennis Prager was struggling with the Hebrew as well. And in his commentary, he agrees with Ibn Ezra and also Dr. Childs at Yale, and has some really good comments on his book, Exodus, the Rational Bible. I'm going to take a look at that. Prager goes on to say, while goodness and compassion may be the most important values in the micro or personal realm, in the macro, a societal realm, truth is even more important than compassion or kindness. Virtually all the great societal evils, whether it's African slavery, communism, Nazism, or anti-Semitism, have been based on lies. There were probably some slave traders, some Nazis, some communists, and some anti-Semites who were compassionate to at least some people. But all of them told, and most of them believed, some great lie that made or allowed them to participate in a great evil. It's just like, for instance, the Soviet Union's Communist Party. It was named Pravda, the truth. And it wasn't the truth. It was total lies of communist propaganda. Or when we talk about the church fathers like Tertullian from 160 to 220 AD, or Origen 185 to 254 AD, or Chrysostom from 344 to 407 AD, or Augustine 354 to 430 AD, or the great Martin Luther 483 to 1541 AD. They all said lies about the Jews. They said they killed Jesus. And if I recall, I think it was Chrysostom who basically said they were murderers. Huh? In Jesus' day, the estimate, this is just an estimate, that there were 3 to 5 million people who lived outside, 3 to 5 million, not people, 3 to 5 million Jews who lived outside of Israel from the days of Alexander the Great until the Emperor Titus. And the Emperor Titus, again, ruled after the temple was destroyed. Matter of fact, he was the general, the son of Vespasian, who actually was there when the temple was destroyed. 3 to 5 million Jews lived outside of Israel. They never heard of Jesus. How could you make a statement, the church fathers, Tertullian, Origen, Chrysostom, Augustine, Martin Luther, and say the Jews murdered Jesus and have a curse on an entire race of people, when in fact, in real history, it couldn't have been all the Jews? It was based, anti-Semitism was based totally on a lie. So Dennis Prager goes on, he says, the ninth commandment means two things. Do not lie when testifying in court. We've covered that. And do not lie outside the courtroom. And that makes sense. And I concur. Do not give a false statement to anyone. Now, in the ninth commandment, the word that's used is re'aka, your neighbor. The Strong's number is H7453. Now, that word re'aka, for instance, among the Orthodox Jews today, they basically say, this is a person who's like me. In other words, what they say is, re'aka basically means only another Orthodox Jew. Not just any Jew, an Orthodox Jew who dresses like me, who believes on me. There are many other Jews who are not Orthodox who might even say it just means a fellow Israeli. But this contradicts God's intentions. He's giving us specifics for a good society. And the implication is, do not lie to anyone. Adonai, the Lord, whose name is Yahweh, I think he doesn't agree with the Orthodox. Let's take a look. We're going to go to Exodus chapter 3, verses 21 through 22. And God is instructing Moses, I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall be that when you go, you will not go empty-handed, but every woman shall ask of her neighbor, and the woman who lives in her house, articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and your daughters. Thus you will plunder the Egyptians. And here it is real clear, in context, that God is saying your neighbor are the Egyptians, and the Egyptians are your neighbor. Now we're going to go to Exodus 11, verses 1 through 3. In Exodus 11, in those 3 verses we read, Now the Lord said to Moses, one more plague I will bring on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out from here completely. Speak now in the hearing of the people that each man ask from his neighbor, and each woman from her neighbor, for articles of silver and articles of gold. The Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Furthermore, the man Moses himself was greatly esteemed in the land of Egypt, both in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and the sight of his people. These people, the Egyptians, and among the Egyptians, there were numbers of the Egyptians who obeyed Pharaoh's order in the beginning of the book of Exodus to kill the Hebrew baby boys right after they were born. Can you imagine? Here is God saying, these are your neighbors. And now he's saying, here in in Exodus chapter 20, verse 16, do not make a false statement. Do not lie to your neighbor. Who's your neighbor? Even Egyptians. Jesus, remember in the parable of the Good Samaritan? Remember, the Samaritans are enemies of the Jews. The Jews and Samaritans hated each other almost as much as they hated Jesus. And we remember that parable, and we should change the name of that parable from the Good Samaritan to the Good Neighbor, because that's how it all got started when you're reading that parable. Somebody asked Jesus, therefore, who is my neighbor? And here's Jesus saying, the Samaritan is your neighbor. Now go and be the same. Then we go to Leviticus 19:34. And Leviticus 19:34. Let me read Leviticus 19:18 first. Leviticus 19:18 says, you shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I'm the Lord. Then we go to verse 34 in Leviticus 19, and we read, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So what we have is this. Leviticus 19:18 says, love your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 19:34 says, you should love your stranger as the stranger as yourself. Now the stranger there is gerim, or gir, singular, gerim, plural. The Strong's number is H1616. And a gir is an alien, a sojourner, or a foreigner. And so God is saying, Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 19:34, love the stranger as yourself. So who is your neighbor? Even a stranger. Now the Orthodox, when they take a look at these 2 verses, when they take a look at the word gir, or in plural, gerim, for alien, sojourner, or foreigners, they say, no, these are not just aliens or sojourners. They're converts. They're proselytes. They're non-Jews who converted to Judaism. And the Torah disagrees. God is basically saying in the very own words, the Egyptians were your neighbors. And Jesus goes even further. As we take a look in Matthew 5, starting in verse 43. And who is Jesus but God? And he said, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Enemies. Love them. Pray for them. When we take a look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 16, the 9th commandment, it really comes down to this. Do not give a false answer to your neighbor. Do not give a false answer to anyone. Do not even lie to your enemy. Amazing. Now, just as an aside, I've studied Islam, and I do have copies of the Quran, which is, I have a recognized translation from an Arab scholar that is recognized by most Muslims as a scholar who's translated from the Arabic into the English correctly. And I can prove to you unequivocally that the Quran says that it's okay for us to lie to a non-Muslim. It's okay to lie to anyone that's not a Muslim. And this is why this is one small piece of proof that indeed Allah could never be the God of the Bible. And one more thing before we go on, and that is Jesus, when he says, do not, or to love your enemies and pray for them, he's agreeing with Torah. Because God, Jesus is God, said that the Egyptians are your neighbors. Those who actually killed the sons of the Hebrews were your neighbors. Jesus is only saying what was in the Torah. So again, don't lie, not to anyone. But then, we remember when Abraham lied to Pharaoh about Sarah, his wife. We remember when Rahab lied to her fellow Canaanites in Jericho. She had hidden 2 Irish soldiers who had come in to spy on the city. Remember that? She lied to them and said, no, I don't know where they are. They must have left. David lied to the Philistine king. And then there's Samuel and Jeremiah. Just imagine this. Here's 1 Samuel 16, verses 1, 2, 3. I want you to hear this. Now the Lord said to Samuel, the great prophet, he's the one, if you remember, who anointed David as king. So the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons. But Samuel said, how can I go? When Saul hears of it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. You shall invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint for me the one whom I designate to you. This one Christian commentator that I read said, well, God wasn't lying. God never told Samuel to lie. He was just telling him to conceal the matter or treat it as a secret. I'm sorry, what God told Samuel to do was do ed sheker, make a false statement to Saul. And we just saw the conclusion. We don't even lie to our enemies. It's a false and misleading statement. This is a little troubling. God lied, or he told Samuel to lie? This is interesting. So Samuel followed God's advice and lied to Saul. You can go to Jeremiah 38, verses 14 through 28. And here we have a very interesting situation. Zedekiah, the king of Judah, he basically tells Jeremiah, okay, that Jeremiah and Zedekiah are talking between each other, and Zedekiah basically says to Jeremiah, let no man know about these words, and you will not die. But if the officials hear, the Babylonian officials hear, that I've talked with you and come to say to you, tell us now what you said to the king and what the king said to you. Do not hide it from us, or we will not put you to death. Then you're to say to him, I was presenting my petition before the king, not to make me return to the house of Jonathan to die there. So you have to read this very carefully, chapter 38 of Jeremiah, verses 14 through 28. And we go to verse 27, that all the officials came to Jeremiah and questioned him. These are the Babylonian officials. So he, Jeremiah, reported to them in accordance with all these words which the king had commanded him. And they ceased speaking with him, since the conversation had not been overheard. In context, Jeremiah lied. He's one of the great prophets. He lied through his teeth. I remember Dennis Prager said he used to have a program on the radio where he would interview a rabbi, a priest, and a pastor. It was on weekly. And they would pose very interesting theological questions. So he said there's a sadistic rapist and murderer chasing a young woman, and she runs by you screaming, help me. And she hides behind a hedge. And the evil one comes by and questions you, did you see the girl? You say, what do you do? So remember, there's a priest, Catholic priest, a Protestant pastor, and a rabbi. Both the priest and the Protestant pastor, they say you cannot lie. The rabbi said, lie, it's in the Bible. Now, this is interesting. This is not an easy answer with this situation. The Bible definitely says, again, we're dealing with the 9th commandment now here. And again, the Hebrew seems to imply, do not lie to anyone. But what about misleading an evil one? Or to mislead a situation so that good can come out of it? I'm reminded of Corrie ten Boom, that Gentile Christian in Holland. We read about her and how the Jewish people look about her as a righteous Gentile. Why? Because she saved so many Jews by hiding them from the Nazis, from the Gestapo. And when you read her biography, her autobiography, when you read the story about Corrie ten Boom, she and her family were really bothered by lying. In their traditional way of being taught, they were taught, do not lie, even to your enemy. And we've just taken a look at some very interesting things here that, what about David? What about Rahab? What about Abraham? Biblical characters that lied. Very interesting indeed. Now, one of the things that the rabbis do is they take a look at the various laws in the Torah, and they say which law might override another law, or which one might be more powerful than another law. This was a dilemma for them. Let's take a look at this. And so there was one great rabbi, Hillel, who said, loving your neighbor as yourself is a stronger and more powerful commandment than do not work on the Sabbath, so this way you can heal a person on the Sabbath. And so there were a bunch of Pharisees who were students of Hillel who basically knew that you could heal on the Sabbath. But Hillel had an opponent, a great rabbi in his own right, Shammai, who disagreed with Hillel and said, no, it says do not work on the Sabbath, and therefore healing is a lot of work. Wait till Sunday. Now this relates to Jesus. Because in Jesus' day, what many of us don't realize, because so many are not teaching the Bible in its historical context, there was the students of Hillel and the students of Shammai and they were basically broken up into two groups. And that's the Pharisees. The Pharisees were broken up into two groups. One group was the students of Hillel. The other were the disciples of Shammai. One group of Pharisees, these Talmudim, these disciples of Hillel, said, you can heal on the Sabbath because love your neighbor as yourself is a law that overrides do not work on the Sabbath as relates to healing. Shammai and his group of Talmudim, his group of disciples, the other group of Pharisees, said, no, you cannot heal on the Sabbath. And when Jesus was healing on the Sabbath, your Bible says, and a certain group of Pharisees came to him. A certain group, because the Pharisees were broken up into those two groups. So we can see how this affects our understanding of Jesus, and understanding about some of the Pharisees and their reaction to him in those days. Now here we have kind of the same situation. You have love your neighbor as yourself and do not lie. But the thing is, love your neighbor as yourself about the woman being chased by the sadistic murderer? This is the same situation as do not work on the Sabbath so that you can heal on the Sabbath, which is loving your neighbor as yourself. So with my example, the young woman will be murdered if I do not lie. I need to obey the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. For me, I have to say, I'd lie to protect the young woman. I'd lie just like Abraham and Samuel and Jeremiah. Now, Israel has been given a mission. Back in 1446 BC, Israel gets God's instruction, his Torah, not law, his instruction, and they're a nation of priests, all of them. Every person, young and old, men, male and female, are priests. He said it. They're a nation of priests. Now, a priest, in terms of definitions, is to bring us to God via ritual and ministry and teaching. And when you go to Deuteronomy 31, 9 through 13, we find out that the priests are to teach the people. Now for Israel, their mission was, and you can read about this in Isaiah 42:6 and Isaiah 49:6, basically they are to be a light to the nations, to bring the salvation of God to the ends of the earth. They are to be a light to the nations, a light to the world, to bring God's salvation to the ends of the earth. Salvation, just as an aside, the Hebrew word there is Yeshua, Jesus' name. Israel got those last 5 commandments, numbers 6 through 10, do not murder, do not commit adultery, etc., to create a good society. We are to look at Israel and to see what God wants. But Israel failed in their mission. Rabbis like the great Maimonides in the 12th century concur. He said, Israel failed to bring the Torah to the world, but Christians, Maimonides said this, Christians gave the world Torah more than the Jews. The only reason why the world knows the word Leviticus or the word Deuteronomy is because of Christians. And this comes from Jewish scholars. God wanted all the nations to know these 5 commandments for a good society. And like Dennis Prager suggests, justice is the key. It's not just to murder. It is not just to take someone's wife. It is not just to steal someone's possessions. It is not just to act upon selfish desires, coveting. We'll take a look at that. And it's not just to lie in court or lie to anyone. And justice requires truth. It's the main pillar. The main pillar of a society. So Torah containing the 9th commandment regarding justice. This we know that Torah is the truth. You can look this up in Psalm 119, verse 142. Torah, God's instruction, is truth. All of your commandments are truth. This is Psalm 119, verse 151. Or the sum of your word, the sum of the Torah is truth. Psalm 119, verse 160. These are very distinct commandments. Do not lie. Do not steal. They're not like relative commandments like do good. What does that mean? The Nazis thought they were doing good. Pro-abortion people think they're doing good. So whose good is it? God is very specific and very detailed. Do not murder. Do not lie. Do not commit adultery. His written word is the truth, and even more. Yeshua. In John 14:6, Jesus said he is the way and the truth and the life. The written word is the truth. Jesus, the living word, is the truth. And now it's our turn. Jesus said it to us. We're the light of the world. And we're to take him and be his witnesses, to provide true statements, true testimony to the ends of the earth about him, to bring God's salvation to the ends of the earth. That's Isaiah 49:6. It continues among the disciples of Adonai Yeshua. So we live the 9th commandment. Never make a false statement, but live the truth. The sum, O God, of your word is truth. As we read that in Psalm 119, verse 160. So I will see you in the next lesson when we'll finally deal with the 10th commandment, do not covet. So until then, shalom.